Second. All right, good evening. It's just after 7 o'clock. I'd like to call to order the November 17th school committee meeting. And if you would all join me in standing, we'll start with pledge of allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Excellent. Welcome, Stacy. We have Jen online, so everyone's in attendance. We have a posted consent agenda as well as minutes from our October 27th meeting and our November 10th public forum and the oath for bills and payroll. So before I accept the motion on those, I just did have one modification or edit on those. Somewhere around like line 221. And I know that this is unintentional, but I'm quoted essentially saying that I'm glad the teachers are doing yoga classes. I'm just not sure how much benefit we get from that. And if those are the words that came out of my mouth, I apologize. What I meant to say was I'm glad that we're offering diverse and unique professional development, such as offering yoga classes, which would be applied to the classroom. I'm just not sure how much benefit we have with massive amounts of professional development. So that was my only edit on the minutes. And I know it was unintentional and it's all good. Did everybody else have a chance to review those? Yeah. All right. So with that minor edit, which I think is just something lost in translation there, I'd like to accept the motion to accept them with the edit.
I move we accept the minutes as amended.
Someone would like to second that? Okay, so motion made by Mr. Austin, seconded by Mr. Marius. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Perfect. All right. This is our first opportunity for interested citizens. We do basically have essentially a one agenda item school committee meeting this evening, which is around school start times. We have student recognition and a dedication, but the point of this is anyone that would like to speak this evening, that's fine. People can't stick around for an hour and a half. I think that if you're speaking on as it relates to school start times, it would be appreciated if you would try to speak after we go through the presentation. But I understand that some folks can't stick around the entire evening, so it's perfectly okay to speak right now. So we'll take a brief pause to see if anyone needs to speak right now. Okay. Perfect. All right, so we'll move into our recognition portion of the evening, and John Feltus will give the student update.
All right. Hello, my name is John Feltus. I'm the student representative for Littleton Schools, and I have some updates to give. In Shaker Lane, last week, Shaker Lane second grade students had their second annual Littletown Day. This is a cardboard creation day that students spend time planning, sketching, and preparing in order to create a little town for Littleton. Thank you to Mrs. McGregor and the second grade team for providing this experience for our second graders, and to our central office and school committee members, as well as Officer Wodzinski for coming out to celebrate our students' creativity. The Shaker Lane staff would like to thank all of the families who came out to the conferences this past week, and wish everyone a happy, healthy upcoming Thanksgiving. At the Brussels Street, they had parent-teacher conferences and the book fair this week, and it was great to see so many families at the school. At the middle school, the annual turkey trot, Turkey Olympics and Turkey Trot are scheduled for the first time in 3 years. They are very excited and looking forward to as much student participation as possible. At the high school today, there was an all-school assembly organized by Miss Harvey. A friend of hers who was also a Holocaust survivor came and spoke to the 10th, 11th, and 12th graders about her experience. Tomorrow, the drama is having their production of The Birds at 7, as well as on the 19th and 20th at 1 o'clock and at 7 o'clock. And on November 22nd, the Powder Puff game will be at 6 o'clock.
Perfect. Thank you. Brad?
The drama is at the middle school?
Yes, it's
okay.
The middle
school. Yep. And the Littletown thing was great. I know several of us were able to go. It was really great, and really congratulate those very, very creative kids.
Yeah,
They're fun.
It was fun. I had a chance to be there as well, and kids will say the darndest things. It was a lot of fun to be there.
Yeah. My favorite thing, if I can just for a second, is putting the retirement village next to the hospital. And because they will be near the mountain. They thought they hike, they might get hurt, so they need to be near the hospital. Which made a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Made a lot of sense.
It's cute.
Yeah.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, Sean.
Kelly, anything I want to put you on the spot, but anything additional this evening?
A couple of things.
Great.
First of all, I'd like to congratulate the high school girls soccer team. They've had an outstanding season this year. They were undefeated in their regular season, 12-0, and they set a league record and 16-0 overall record. So very impressive. League champions back-to-back. They were Central Mass district finalists, and they were in the MIAA Final Four. And multiple players on the team have been named to play in an all-state team. So very impressive year. Very impressive group of young ladies. So congratulations, and we're very proud of their accomplishments. Also, congratulations to the coaching staff for helping them become the best that they can be. Very proud. Another recognition, we had a wonderful November 8th District PD Day. The title of the day was Disrupt the Status Quo, Ensure Learning for All Students. We had a keynote speaker, Ken Williams, out of New York. He wears a cowboy hat though, and I don't know where he picked that up from, but I had to ask him if he was from the Western United States or around there, but that seems to be his hat to go, so to speak. Very, very interesting speaker, very motivational, and our staff from each school district came out of the keynote with lots of good ideas. We also had 32 sessions for our educators that day as well. So great feedback. Our educators were thrilled with the offerings, and also the opportunity to work together with teachers from other districts is very powerful. So thank you to Beth and everybody else from the other districts that helped organize this evening, or this day, I should say. Looking forward to next year's Tri-District PD Day, and it will be held in Air Shirley. And we had another successful vaccination clinic this week as well. All the slots were taken up, so there's certainly a demand, and we'll keep doing this as long as there's a demand that remains. And the last one would be, we're going to offer take-home COVID tests to families where they can pick them up at the schools next week if they would like to. We are offering a last-minute drive-by central office on that Tuesday as well. So if you need some COVID tests over the holidays, feel free to stop by and pick them up. And you're at your respective schools, they'll be available in the office area for you.
Very good. Thank you so much. I can attest to all of that. We became bandwagon girls soccer fans at the end. That was a blast. And we were offered COVID tests at our parent-teacher conferences today. So, all right. The next topic here for recognition is dedication to Millie McGovern. We were approached by various members of the community select board and various others, but it reads discussion to make a motion to vote a dedication to Millie McGovern to be memorialized with a plaque or similar recognition on the ticket booth at Alumni Field. And I'd like to invite Maureen Woods to approach the podium and just give us a little bit of information about this.
Yes, thank you, Justin, very much.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm here on behalf of Anne Marie Krause and Nancy Morrison, both very good friends of Millie's. Neither of them be here tonight, but they are, I think, the ones who started this idea. And so they want this board's permission to name the ticket booth in honor of Mrs. McGovern. A name has not been picked out yet. If they need to come back when they get a name, they can. There's a lot batted around from Millie's Place to Mildred McGovern Memorial ticket booth, so they'll probably land somewhere in between those. They'd like to have the dedication at the first football game in September of 2023, so that gives them plenty of time to raise private funds to purchase the sign or whatever it may be. And that's it. So they'd like your permission to go forward with honoring Mrs. McGovern by naming the ticket booth.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So just for the committee's clarification, it's considered school property. So we would it's a bit of a formality, but we would just, make a motion. We offer any discussion, but I would suspect that we would make a motion and vote it through. And then members of the select board or the private community members might do some fundraising to put this in place. And I don't think there's any need to come back when they pick a name or anything like that. But so any discussion or?
No.
That is great.
Great idea.
Yeah.
So I'll make a motion.
If there's a name thought of, I'm sure it will be up there and for everybody to be there.
Great.
Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you. So I move that we agree to dedicate the ticket booth to Millie McGovern to memorialize her contributions to Littleton, to our community and to our athletic programs.
I'll move. We have a second.
Okay.
Perfect. Motion made by Mr. Austin, seconded by Mr. Patel. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Mark that as unanimous. Thank you very much for
Thank
being
you.
here.
Thank you.
All right. We're going to move on to our singular presentation item this evening, which is school start times. An informational update from the school start time subcommittee. There's been a lot of work that's gone into this. I just want to thank Beanel and Jen and other members of the school start time committee. Surveys have gone out, public forums have happened. I suppose if you don't know that this is taking place, this is kind of like your last opportunity to get informed on the topic. And the plan tonight is to go through a presentation, have a school committee discussion, no vote this evening, but just some good dialogue, additional opportunity for community input on the topic. And then we plan to essentially move forward with some sort of decision next meeting. But Jen's remote. That doesn't mean she can't contribute. I don't know what the plan is. Beanel, do you want to start? Or
yeah, I think Jen just chimed in wherever. And also I think for everybody, if you have taken a peek at it, it's a lot of slides. And so we don't need to save questions till the end. I think it'll be a lot that piles up. So I'll take a pause between sort of sections and we can do questions.
okay.
Otherwise, I think it'll be a lot.
All right. We don't have a ton of folks online either, but maybe we would at least take go a third, or half, and then even allow maybe for interested citizens halfway through, depending upon where we go.
Sure. But, and I think especially more like clarification slides, because otherwise it'll be a long list, and then we're going to go back, and that's what I mean. I think it would just be better to pause.
Okay, great.
But let's see how it goes. So we can go to next slide. This has been the process of the school start time project. And so in June, we formed a working group, Jen and I leading it on behalf of the school committee. And we had a subcommittee that was formed with two principals, man, Dr. Flenchy, Steve. We had two parents, two students, Mike, the athletic director. I'm not forgetting someone. I said two teachers.
That's what students.
Yep. So we had a little bit of a Noah's Ark of a subcommittee, tried to have voices and representation from various different groups and constituencies. We talked about what criteria we want to consider when thinking about this, things like athletic schedules, what times of day children learn best, parent input in terms of feedback, bus schedules. It was a pretty great conversation and discussion. And so we had a list of criteria. And during the summer, we then, or key blockers and issues. During the summer, we moved in the school committee to put GPI, a consulting group, in charge of sort of doing a study in terms of challenges, route optimization, bus routes, like a lot of data that we felt like we couldn't figure out ourselves. To really do an in-depth study and using those criteria to determine options. There were over 19 options. There's a study that we shared with the committee, and we then narrowed it down to 4 potential new options, and then the 5th option being the current start time. So that brings us up to basically September, October. In November, we sent out a community survey. We had an open forum last week. with some attendance from online and in person. And we are here tonight to look at the results and then plan to vote at the next meeting. Go next slide. So the 5 options that we ended up with that were in the survey. The first 2 are essentially similar options, putting middle school and high school in the middle tier start time, and then flipping Shaker Lane and Russell Street between option 1 and option 2. Option 3, I apologize, it should be shift 25. And so it basically shifts from the current time roughly about 25 minutes. And I did say this in the email, we did say this in context as well, to not focus on like the exact number and time, because those are subject to, 10 minutes here and there based on bus and timings and what we figure out. But just generally, shift 25 just keeps the current schedule and moves it a little bit later. And then we had option 4, which was our 2-tier option, combining Shaker Lane and high school at the same time, but not on the same buses, and then middle school and Russell Street at the same time. And I'll talk a little bit later about why option 4 was the 2-tier option we went with and in progress since then. And then option 5, which is our current schedule.
And Beetle, if I can jump in, one important thing about option 3, the shift 25, is that it's not exactly just shifting every year, but it's a shift lane and a flip of Lane and Russell Street. The reason we did that, we heard very, very strong feedback from Michelle King and, representing students and the teachers there, that the youngest kids, even with the current start time, have a hard time getting into sort of the afternoon hours, meltdowns, and starting, any later than they do now would be almost impossible, for the teachers to kind of manage. So with that option, we flipped it so that everybody would start later, but also Shaker Lane would go second and Russell Street would go third, because presumably the slightly older kids would have an easier time starting and ending later.
The Shaker Lane is actually a little bit earlier because the 3:15 end, we heard feedback that there was, by 2:30, they're sort of winding down, these younger kids and melting down. And so that was the reason for the flip. Thanks, Jen.
Jen, there's a little bit of feedback on your end. So we heard 90% of what you said, but I don't know if there's any way for you to try to improve that if you want to speak more in the future.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah.
So I could take a pause just on process so far before we jump into the data itself. Any questions about process?
No.
I think it's great. Really clear process, a lot of input. Good.
Okay, so the survey. So we had 1,354 responses, which is awesome, incredible. I actually don't even know out of how many I didn't calculate, but I think this is a pretty healthy response from the community and a good spread across different constituent groups, as you'll see. So if you look at this pie chart, you can definitely see, the largest percentage being option 5, which is the current schedule, but it's also important to look at it as 33% preferring to keep the current schedule, with 67% preferring change. And then what that change is sort of spread across 4 different options. So I just want to highlight that, it's really easy to see this big red chunk as the biggest percentage, but that actually means about 30% want to keep the current schedule. So broken out by participants, we could see we got the most number of responses from parents/guardians, and then about 150 staff and some 400 students in the middle school and high school. And again, interesting to see that of the parent body, roughly 26% voted to keep the current schedule, and then a spread across different options, with the second choice being the option 4 2-tier. But with staff and students, a little bit above 40% voting to keep the current schedule, and a lot of feedback and comments you'll see later on about that. And then again, a spread of what the second choice would be for options. And then we really tried to just slice and dice the data in every possible way. So you can see, so this is the vote by school, but this is parents, staff, and students by school. Pretty evenish distribution there, you can see. And then broken out by school, by staff in particular. So with the Shaker Lane staff, you can see option 4 with the 2-tier, which does put Shaker Lane at the earlier time, was preferred. And then the second one being the current options, and then the third one being Shaker Lane starting. And I think, you know, consistent with the feedback we had heard from Michelle Kane about just the younger children getting pretty tired later in the afternoon. And then Russell Street, a definite preference, more than half for the current schedule, and also highlighting Russell Street is the one school, the current schedule that starts at 8 o'clock. And 8 o'clock seems to be this sweet start time for anybody. And so not surprised to see the current schedule preference there. And then middle school, high school, a little bit less than half. And again, you'll see it in a lot of the comments why, and then a spread across what the change could look like. Same deal broken out by parent vote by school. Pretty consistently 20-something% of parents across the school preferring a change. And then kind of an even spread in different percentages of what it could look like. And then the spread by students. And we'll do the next slide, and then I can pause, and Jen, you could jump in or any questions. The vote by choices, the next slide. So in the survey, we did ask people to rank their first, second, and third choice. And typically when you're doing ranking, you sort of have the first choice and you take the one that has the highest, which in this case is option 5. And then everyone that voted option 5, you then see what they voted as their second choice. What is interesting in doing that is we found that 139 individuals actually picked option 5 as their second choice, and then 127 of them picked it as their third choice. And Google survey is not advanced enough where it could have controlled that from happening, if that makes sense. So there's 127 people that picked current schedule as first, second, and third. And so that really messes with the way you're supposed to do choice ranking. Yeah. It was a sort of a way to game the system, if you will.
People bullet voting the survey.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so next time we do something more advanced than Google survey maybe, but so that's why I sort of kept it in this pie graph, but keep in mind that that 22% in the second choice includes 139 people that had also included it as their first choice. And it also felt weird to remove them. And so we sort of kept it as is, but then didn't go into choice ranking like you normally would. Mm-hmm. Questions about the data so far? Jen, did I miss to highlight something?
No, you didn't. Can you guys hear me better? I'm on my laptop now. Yeah. Yes. Great. Okay. No, that was perfect.
That's my only question is, I mean, kind of appears like across the board that in most cases, no change receives the highest percentage. Just a cursory review here of this. And then what's interesting is this whole thing was designed behind starting the high school later. But the one place where there's like an outlier is that Shaker Lane wants to try to start earlier, mm-hmm. right? On that vote by staff, 38% Shaker Lane. Mm-hmm. They're looking for an alternative, like that option 4 being 38%. It's like the staff at Shaker Lane is really behind trying to move their schedule up because an 8:50 start time, it's more that 3:15 dismissal time, I think is we're hearing detrimental because they start to lose attention as you discussed. So it's interesting that this is designed around trying to start later, and we've got a school saying, I want to try to start earlier.
Yeah, totally. Two different problems
to address. Yeah. Am I interpreting that correctly? I guess that's my question.
And I think you're right. The impetus for this was moving the high school, middle school start times later. I think if both challenges were to be able to be addressed, that would probably be ideal. I'm not sure if there is a scenario that will address both of those plus all the other challenges that have been brought up. So option 4 does seem like it would.
Right.
Sort of, but you'll see later on too why option 4 presents its own challenges.
Correct. And then the only thing I'll say is, like I was joking earlier that, you know, we knew from the beginning there is no perfect solution, because if there was, we would have done it a long time ago. And if we make no change, you know, we're going to upset roughly 65% of the people. But if we make a change, we're probably going to upset closer to 80% of the people, because they're not going to get what they want.
Yeah.
In terms of their first choice.
Right. And keep in mind, so you said the highest percentage is the current schedule, but that's a little bit deceiving in terms of it is, but if we had asked the question of, would you prefer the current schedule or a change? It's likely that the change would be the highest percentage, right? It's because there's 4 options for change that's for
It could be yes or no. Sure.
Right.
No, yep. That's a good point as well.
But you're right. Yeah, of the 70% that want change, perhaps there are another 30% that would say, okay, but if that's the change, I would rather have the current schedule. So you'll see in my next steps how we propose to address that.
Well, and that's where you explaining how this data is skewed is frustrating, because I was trying to figure out the same thing. We have 1/3 who wants no change, we have 2/3 who want a change. I was trying to figure out, well, what's 1 + 2 in each of these. So what's option 1? So that's, you know, it's 55% total here. But if some of the second choice are also in the first choice, then that data becomes much less meaningful to me. I was trying to figure out if there's one where there's not just plurality, but there's a majority of people who think, well, it's not my first choice, but it's my second choice.
Yeah.
But if
it was option 4, if you take out the 139 and the 127 that then skew it to be option 5 across the board, option 4 would then be the next.
And what was because by the time you get the third choice, then that becomes less meaningful to me. But first choice, second choice is where like a combination of it's what I want or it's almost what I want. That's the combined number that's interesting to me to see what the public wants.
Yeah, something to keep in mind too is we presented 4 other choices. And so again, we're going to address this in our next steps. If there were not 4, you might see very different data.
And this is where if there were an intensity measure as well.
Yeah.
This is great. It's just we're all trying to figure out what it means.
Yeah.
And having this data skewed a little bit by the repeaters is
Yep.
Yeah. And I also want to also chime in and say, like, I want to phrase this correctly, but a lot of people, I think, you can read the comments. We read every comment, and many people who responded really were voting understandably in it. Sorry, hang on, let me just get out of here. In a kind of a voting based on what their current situation is, right? So my child is young and I don't have childcare. And so, you know, I like the setup the way that it is because I've worked my life around it, and it works for me today. And, you know, understandable, right? Like change is really hard, but there is definitely a bias built in here for just keeping things at the status quo because people have already worked their lives out around the way that things are. So while this community survey is incredibly important and we actually want more input from the community, and we'll talk about that in a little while, we also have to recognize that, you know, we have to think as a school committee about what's right for the community and what's right for the future going forward. And change is hard, but people will build new schedules around, you know, whatever we decide, hopefully. So just something to keep in mind.
I will also say this is comments as well, but to address your comment earlier, Justin, about the high school being the largest percentage, you can definitely tell by the comments, and we heard from one of our student representatives as well, that they were looking at when the high school started and not any of the other schools in the options. And so didn't actually rank in terms of a whole picture, just like the high school starts at this time, choice, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Versus looking at the whole thing. But we also saw a lot of comments from high school and middle school students about the fear of not being able to do their sports activities or do their other school activities. I think without realizing that everything would sort of shift. And there was definitely some that acknowledged, okay, so everything's going to shift. That means, you know, my whole life goes later. But some that were, well, if you move it later, then can I really do the thing that I'm signed up for? And I think, you know, the answer to that is like everything would sort of shift after that. And it takes time. It's not an instant, you know, life changes, but like over time shift. And so there was a little bit of like, don't change it because then everything won't follow. But, you know, we've had discussions with the athletic director and the principals, and this would be like a whole community being behind it, essentially. So we can go to, yep, this slide. These are just some data points we collected that I think are interesting. So we asked what factors influence people's decision the most, and you can see health and well-being and impact on sleep being the top two. But it's interesting because there's some, and we're happy to share raw data. There's some 500 or 600 comments primarily focused on work schedule and athletic. And yet the top two factors people say influencing their vote are health and well-being and impact on sleep. And I think that is very well true. But a lot of the fear and questions are around childcare, work schedule, and after-school activities. And then on the next one, and this is a little bit what we were talking about, Justin, we asked for sort of a feedback on, or a scale of 1 to 5 on the current schedule. And so you can see 24% ranked it as, please keep it, a change would be very difficult. 26% sort of in the middle, I could do a change, but also if you kept it, I kind of figured it out. And then 15% saying very, very challenging, prefer a change. It's pretty spread. So like you said, if there's whatever we do, no perfect solution.
Right.
And then the last question here about, you know, we acknowledge that if we went to 2-tier, ideally, of course, there's a solution within the current budget, but if not, there's definitely the option of having to increase the bus fees to offset some of the costs. And so we just wanted to get a gauge of what this would mean for families and what this would look like. And so about 40% said they would still continue riding the bus. And then about 7 or 8% said they would stop. There's definitely some comments about this. It's one of the themes that come up around, you know, balancing what the cost is with what the benefit of this is. And so I think if the cost became astronomical for families to afford it, then they wouldn't really appreciate that.
And I think that's true for the district as a whole, right? So if not all the costs, I presume, would be passed on to the families, but if it's an additional, like this, that's my question is about the numbers. Like, what does it cost to run an extra 2 buses, an extra 3 buses? Can we build that into our budget? Sustainable? So again, that becomes part of the true cost benefit analysis.
Yeah.
Bino, if you could go back a slide, what are your thoughts on the scale question of 1 to 5?
Yeah. So, I mean, I look at this as it's actually very aligned with the graph if you look at it. So somewhere between 20 and 40% would prefer the current schedule, but also feel like it's just working and I, you know, built my life around it and everything is fine the way it is. So just need it. 15 to somewhere around 15 to 30% say this is terrible. We need to do a change. It needs to be immediate, or we need to work towards a change. And then that 26% being the highest in between doesn't surprise me, because I think what I assume a lot of these people are saying is it actually depends on what the change is, which is, again, I think why you'll see what we're recommending as a next step. All of this data sort of informed what we're recommending as a next step. And this is definitely part of it, is people voted the current schedule, but it depends. They voted a change. It just depends on what the change is.
Thank you. Yeah, you know, I was trying to interpret that slide as well. And I gave it some thought of, you know, I'm taking the option 3 and I'm combining with 4 and 5, because I'm thinking those people are basically satisfied or very satisfied with the status quo. Like 3, you can live with it, right? You're not demanding a change. So that ends up being like 68% of people, like 2/3 of people are essentially okay with what we've got.
Yeah.
That was my first thought process. And then my second thought process was, let's take the 3s and just eliminate them from the equation. And we've got about 41% of the people that are saying what we have works great. And then we've only got about a third, 33% saying, help me, I need change.
Mm-hmm.
So
it depends if you walk into this seeing the glass half full or the glass half empty. So if you already see it as full, you're going to see the 3s with the 4s and the 5s saying, well, you could live with it. It's already half full. If you're going to see it as empty, you'll loop the 3s with the 1s and the 2s because they want change, but not if it's worse than what they currently have.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I don't like what's interesting here is I don't really have a dog in the fight, which, you know, previous lively school committee discussions I did. So it's unique for me to come at this without like a real bias or something like that. So yeah, I could put the 3 people in either camp.
Exactly.
And that's why that second scenario, I just said, okay, let's eliminate those folks because they're kind of up the middle anyways.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's just more of a, like, what do you think?
Yeah, so for the exact same thing, I've already done the math. 33.5% eliminating the 3s or saying they'll be fine with either one versus 40.8%. So it's 1/3 versus 40%. Yeah, it's close. It's close. And it's what's clear is there's no, what's clear to me right now is I don't see a clear mandate from this data. All right. And so part of what we'll have to do as a school committee is think for ourselves and look at and read the data and figure out what we think is right for our students, which is what we ran to do, right?
Exactly. And something something we haven't even talked about is, and I'm now second guessing our presentation a little bit and thinking maybe we should have led with citing some of the research studies. I kind of feel like we all have read them and heard about them, but this is, we know through scientific studies for years and years now that, the older kids need more sleep, that school start times across the country are shifting to later for the older kids. So, I don't want to over-index too much on the community feedback. It's very, very important. We have to absolutely listen to all of our constituents and the people who are living this every day. But we also have to think about and really understand what is needed here and do the right thing in terms of what we know is better for the older kids. It is a mental health issue and a physical health issue. So, this slide, I'm looking at it now with fresh eyes through your eyes, and I see what you're saying. It also doesn't add up with the other slides earlier where we're seeing, 33% of people wanting no change and 67% of people wanting change. It's kind of a weird disconnect, but we need to take this as input, but also, make the right decision for our town.
Yeah, it's easy to be wrong. I also will say it's much easier to just do what you're doing, even though it's hard, because change is hard. Sometimes just like the human nature, right? Until you make the change and then you think, how did I do that thing for the time that I did? But like Jen said, I think we lead with, the community survey is intended to be data to inform us, but not the only piece of data. So we've been sharing the research, but happy to bring that to light in our future presentation as well.
Can I just ask too for this? So like this graph here is obviously it's telling and not telling at the same time because of that 3 in the middle. But have you teased this out? Because it looks like 58% of parents did the survey, 11% for staff, and 30% for students. Mm-hmm. Have you teased this out to see what this graph would look like if you took out those or separated those participants? Because it seems like a lot of the Russell Street staff really do agree with. They really do like what they want. So I'm wondering if that's skewing it. The same with the students. They're just looking at their specific time of what they're doing. I'm just curious as to see what this would look like if you separated those out to see if there's any kind of conclusion that you could get.
I didn't, but I'm happy to because we're definitely going to be following up with more data. So I'm happy to break this one out as well. And I think it's a good point, Stacey, you mentioned of like staff that work at a particular school are likely going to stay at that school. So even when they're thinking about their long-term, right, they're thinking about the schedule of that school. They don't need to think about the schedule necessarily because they're not moving up in the grades. And same for the students. We asked middle school and high schoolers who are in that, world right now. The parents, for the most part, some were sort of looking today, my child is today, here's a schedule that works for me, but many were sort of considering long term, and they can have that perspective. And so it's a different subset of constituents responding than the staff and the students, I would say.
Well, the parents have probably also, many of the parents have had children move through the system, and they've dealt with middle school, they dealt with high school, and whether that or they anticipate they will soon.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think all of the data from everyone is obviously impactful, but if we can separate it out in certain circumstances, it might give us a better idea as to what.
And I'm not saying we should give parents more weight. But
right.
I don't want my comments to be misconstrued. I realize they just have a different perspective.
Yes.
If anything, the students are at the center of this. And some definitely commented on it, and you'll see we can go to the comments now. The next slide. Yep. So the categories of comments generally we saw, of course, for the pro change, a lot about sleep, not just their own sleep as students, but studies for sleep from the perspective of parents as well as staff. Again, the feedback we've heard about younger kids starting earlier and ending earlier, and waking up early is painful and hard to focus. And then those against change, just leave it as it is, it's fine. A lot about after school for younger kids and childcare. And so this was interesting too, because like Jen said, keeping it the same doesn't solve childcare, and changing it doesn't solve childcare. That is a whole different conversation and challenge. But I think people have sort of pieced together childcare solutions based on what it is. And so it feels very challenging and unfathomable to piece together something else with a change. And so there was a lot of feedback on just childcare being a challenge, especially for younger students. Some comments around, later start time is basically going to mean kids going to sleep later. And, Jen has shared some research about that as well. But then we also heard the opposite comment of, it's not true. If it starts later, kids go to sleep later. There's basically a comment that negates every comment.
But my sense of reading these was that some are based on kind of peer-reviewed research that the later start time leads to more sleep. Mm-hmm. And the ones saying they won't sleep more are more anecdotal. They're right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. A lot of parents and even some students saying, a lot of my friends, or I know a lot of friends, kids who play video games at night. And so if you start later, they're just going to play later. Mm-hmm. And I think we did share some research around, that's not actually what we've seen in terms of the research. Like we have seen, especially the children that want to go to sleep and get more sleep, they will do that. The ones that want to play video games and stay up later will do that regardless. And then a lot about safety and buses being early and it being very dark and it being a safety hazard. So maybe we can just go, I won't read through these comments. We can go to the next slide. I tried to highlight like key words within each comment. This is really a snapshot of the 500 or so comments that were there, but trying to pull out ones that were unique and really sort of captured the essence of what other parents or students or staff had said as well. So I'll just review and then feel free to read or call out any that stood out to you. There was a comment about Shaker Lane and Russell Street starting at the same time, and I'm going to save that one for later and address it in a later slide. A lot of talk about the 3-tier system and how that requires parents to be available for a 2-hour window for bus pickups and drop-offs. And there's also a comment about a half day. If you have a child across those 3 tiers, you essentially get your kid picked up, and then an hour and a half later, your kid is already being dropped off. Really not a window at all.
That only happens 32 times a year. So.
Yeah, sit 12 or so that we discussed. So you can't even go to the gym. No, I'm kidding. Children attending schools with the same times, and really, again, we talked a lot about childcare challenges, but having spread across the 3 tiers is also a challenge for childcare. And so the 2-tier sort of addressing that a little bit in terms of the logistics and cohesiveness. Commenting on, even a little bit would be good. Yeah, I can get on board with a small change. And so some people feeling like, okay, if we're talking about like a whole hour, that's really going to mess things up. But somebody in one of the comments had written 7:45, 8. A couple people said 20, 30 minutes. That I can get behind. And then a comment about not having Russell Street kids and middle schoolers on the same bus, and then the dangerous waiting in the dark. Next slide. Yep, so a parent commenting on the struggle for their high school, middle schooler, but also not wanting it to be too late, concerned about safety. A parent saying the schedule has worked for years, there's no need to change it. Another parent saying they would love the later time. Ideally, what people are asking for is a later start time and an earlier end time. So if that's possible, then we've solved it all. And then also parents talking about, students are already up really late doing homework, defeats the whole purpose of change if they're going to be up there. And then more comments. My child has turned from a kid who loves school to one that fights me. I'm looking at other schools because this isn't working. Would not be happy about paying more. There was multiple comments about that. Again,
buses
for buses.
Yeah.
Yep. Would like to understand about options to alleviate the financial burden to families in terms of charging more for buses. Again, another comment about looking ways to implement incremental change. And so this parent commented on, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. There could be an incremental change that eventually leads to more sleep, even later start times for the older children. And then, for prioritizing health and academics, then they should be prioritized over after-school programs and athletics. Staff comments, again, I'll address that first comment later, but another comment about combining Shaker Lane and Russell Street. A comment from a staff about this is not a lot of upheaval for not a lot of gain. Again, the exact opposite of someone else saying, if you made it too late, I wouldn't be on board, but if you did a little bit, I would. This staff member saying the opposite. This 8 o'clock start time really being the perfect time. And so again, no surprise that we saw Russell Street staff preferring to keep things the same. And then a 2-tier system means less time for students on the bus and more time for teachers to focus on teaching and not waiting for buses. And then next slide. Staff who are also parents talking about their perspective about what that would mean for them for childcare. This one staff member saying making the start time good for all students would be ideal, just be a lot of buses, but that would definitely solve everything other than the finance problem.
And traffic that one too.
Sure, a lot of buses, yeah. But wouldn't we all just like to start at 8 something? That would be great. And then again, a comment about Shaker Lane and Russell Street and the middle school and high school starting together. A staff member's perspective working at 2 different schools and what it would be like if there was discrepancy. I mean, there already is 3 tiers, so I know this is a challenge already. And then again, Shaker Lane faculty talking about the drop in attention at the end of the day for younger students. And then the same theme in the student comments. Again, you'll see a range of can't focus in the morning. If we would do 20 to 30 minutes, that would even make a difference. I can get on board. To it's really dark outside of the bus stop. To I wouldn't get any more sleep. It would just mean I'm doing everything later. And I really actually like getting out earlier. I mean, it's, even as adults, there are morning birds and nocturnal people. And so we saw that spread across the students as well. Some like being up early and getting things done, and some are really struggling to focus. And then the last slide, this student's comment was pretty insightful about, if we're really talking about mental health and for teenagers, and the challenges are sports and homework, and then those are issues we should be solving and prioritizing student health first. Another comment about struggling in the morning. Again, a student worried about risking their athletic future if we change the start time. And another student saying they enjoyed having afternoons at home and getting out early. Before we move to comparisons, any thoughts, or Jen or anyone here about comments?
None for me this time. John, do you have, I'm curious,
Well,
I mean,
I might just,
you had an opportunity to fill out the survey, but
Yeah.
you're also present with us, and I would be interested
Yeah.
in your feedback.
well, it just, I am noticing that a lot of the things that people say do kind of contradict actual data that like I have seen about changing start times, you know, like sleeping schedules and teenagers and how their minds work and stuff like that. So I think that a lot of those concerns, people might have them, but if they knew what was actually going on, they may be more open to a change. So that's something that I've noticed a lot, and just noticed it as I know what the actual data. But yeah, pretty much it. Also, I do get the athletic start times. I mean, I do preseason as an athlete. But I do think it's interesting to also talk about the buses in the morning. So, I mean, I drive to school every day on windy Littleton roads that are bumpy, and it's pitch black. So, and that's November. So, you know, I mean, there's a lot of things to consider.
Yeah, I'm curious too. You know, you mentioned that you're in athletics too, and this comment about losing athletic future. We did, like, Mike is part of our subcommittee, and we did sort of talk about at what point it would really be a very, very big challenge for athletics and field scheduling and all that. And 8 o'clock was fine, generally, because practices and games all sort of start after 2:30, if I'm not misquoting. And so it wouldn't really impact athletics.
And I also know that a lot of other towns have made the same shift, and their athletic departments haven't come crumbling down. And we sometimes we're up against other towns that have made this change, and we just move our meet time so that they're able to make it.
Well, if you wouldn't mind, then we can go to the town comparison.
Sure.
It's a great segue, Jen. Thank you. So these are the neighboring towns that are not athletic competitors, but I think just interesting to see. And these are sorted by the high school start times. So you'll see where Littleton falls in comparison to some of the other towns, you know.
So just to clarify, so I was trying to figure out the sorting because it's by high school start time.
Yes.
Okay.
That was the focus of this
great
study, right? So we sorted it by that. But interesting to note Sudbury. I just want to point out Sudbury, unlike any of the other schools, starts the elementary before the middle school, high school. They're not one of our athletic competitors, but no other town has.
They're doing it.
I commend Sudbury. Figured out how to do it. Because this is really what the data suggests, if you will, right? And we hear sort of in the comments in terms of, you know, the older students needing more sleep, but the younger students really not functioning that well past later into the afternoon. And so that's what they did, but they are sort of an outlier there.
Can I just clarify? So these are towns that have made the change, or they have, they are on our schedule.
This is their current schedule. I know Acton Boxborough made a change in 2016, 2017, because we looked at a lot of their
So they have the elementary school starting
the
latest.
Acton Boxborough also had a 3-tier, and they did change to 2-tier. I don't remember what their 3-tier was, but within this, they also shifted to 2 tiers.
Okay.
Acton Boxborough also owns all of their buses and don't work with the bus company, so they purchased more buses.
I have to say, for the record, I'm disappointed that you don't remember Acton Boxborough's bus schedule from 2015. But that's fine.
I tried to memorize every detail.
It's ridiculous. I'm kidding, of course.
Okay, and
Maynard Maynard has the high school, the middle school, and the upper elementary school. I don't know what their building configuration is, but all roughly starting at the same time. So that's curious about that.
There's a lot of logistics to take into place, right? Like in Littleton, we're unique in that we have 4 schools. We only have 1 lower elementary and 1 upper elementary, and our middle school and upper elementary are next to each other. And like, this is all the stuff that GPI took into account. Acton Boxborough, I know they have 1 elementary, the middle school and high school all in the same parking lot, but then the other 5 schools are everywhere. Like, everybody sort of has their own geographical logistics to take into account.
And they also took into account population clusters. And when you start looking at clusters of students in our town, by age group. It's really kind of interesting to
Yeah.
see why we can't do some of the things that we'd like to do.
Yeah, that's in the GPI report as well, the heat mapping of our town. So with athletic competitors, as John was mentioning, you can see there is definitely a chunk of schools within 715 and 740, let's call it. What I don't have information on is how many of these schools are doing the same process we are. And it's possible, I don't know if you know, Kelly, I think John actually, John Harrington.
I'm not sure if John is with us today.
I think I saw him.
I wonder if John has some more information.
John, did you mention in the subcommittee meeting about towns looking into this, or am I imagining that?
No, there's plenty of towns looking into this. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and John had talked to some principals too, I believe. But we do know that some towns are looking into this. Of course, you never know what they're going to end up with. But there are a couple that have made changes, you can see. And like John said, I don't know what happens if you're, like, for example, if you're playing Leominster and they out at 3:30, I guess you just
wait till 3:30.
You just wait.
Well, Lunenburg made the change a few years ago, and it's been fine from 8 to 2:30. So there's other schools looking at it. I'll be meeting with Midwatch principals. It's 26 principals tomorrow morning. So I'll be able to gather some additional direct feedback tomorrow morning. But we're not the only district looking at it this year. A number of districts throughout Central Mass are doing the same thing we're doing right now in a comprehensive way.
Do we know of these schools, which ones have made that shift? Do you guys have any information on any schools locally that have done the time change?
Just obviously Harvard, Lunenburg.
Harvard just went through it.
The ones that have the high school later have already made that shift. Is that we can assume?
Yeah.
That? Okay.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of schools.
And we can, before the next meeting, we can reach out. And I know John mentioned he's having a meeting tomorrow with a lot of principals. We can also reach out to some, like in Lunenburg, I think they recently made the change, to some school board members, and just to see, what their process was, how it's been going, what challenges they had to overcome, just get some data.
I have some thoughts about that. I don't know if now's the time, or I would love to, if the research that I've read shows that you will have you'll have better attention, maybe lower tardiness. There's a lot of kind of very specific factors. We heard from a parent committee at the end of last school year about that. I'd love to see if that's the lived experience of schools that have done this recently.
Yeah.
So what happens at Lunenburg? What happened at Harvard? What do they see about some of these things? Both, is there data and their tardiness and things like that, or anecdotally?
Yeah.
What's happening? I teach a college class at Salem High School. I was there today. I was just asking teachers I know, what have you seen?
Yeah.
And so it's anecdotal. It's not data.
Yeah.
But they were telling what they're seeing.
Yep.
And
yeah.
If I could, Brad, if I may, I could offer to do a survey with the Midwatch principals who have gone through the change of school start times. I think it would be beneficial for us to get that data. It wouldn't take long to collect it. There's a number of schools that are looking at it right now, and there's a number of schools that have previously have changed recently. So we could gather the information to be helpful for us.
I think it'd be wonderful if we could do that. I think it'd be helpful for us and for the other schools. It's a way for all 26 schools to kind of help each other out and figure some stuff out. That'd be great, John. Thank you.
I will say what's interesting about anecdotal data. I think there was a comment somewhere that one of the parents said, we just did this at my district. It made a big difference. And then they had some additional comments about sleep and tardiness. And then at the community forum, we heard a parent who's a staff somewhere who said, I noticed no difference. Anecdotal data is very tricky. I think definitely doing a larger survey of multiple districts who made the change would be very interesting. I also think the way they do research, they really take a large group of people, because for every anecdotal data that says this, you'll find anecdotal data that says this.
Well, that's why I'm not saying at Salem, they said this, to talk to 5 people and for 10 minutes after class.
Yeah.
But if we're asking other principals,
Yeah.
maybe we could talk about what specifically do you have, you know, what measures have you tracked to see? Because I'm sure those districts are interested if they've seen a measurable change for the positive or for the negative.
Yeah.
And so we could ask them, you know, just maybe even broadly, what data have you collected that shows there's been a change?
Yeah. The other thing too, I would say, and also from my perspective as an educator, is I don't think this committee should measure this change across impact in testing and scoring and things like that, because I don't think you will see an immediate change necessarily. The very next year, there should be no expectation that MCAS scores are going to soar, right? It's just unrealistic. But also it's the intangible of the student mental health is not something, it might be reflected in test scores, but that shouldn't be the outcome that we're looking for. That was one of the questions that came up at the community forum. And I think it's a good one, is how will we measure success if a change is made? And I don't know what the answer to that is for this committee, but I would urge the answer not to be tested.
I think you really need to be cautious. There are just too many variables that are linked to achievement. And my own personal opinion, it's going to be soft data.
Yeah.
That's the only measure that I really need.
But we can assume that we do have generally the data with all of the studies, that those are all of schools that have made the change, and they have done kind of scientific analysis of what the results were. So we can almost assume or hope that we would say, if we were able to get that hard data here locally, that it would represent the same conclusion.
Exactly. And that's why we have those articles to reference, and we can follow that data and those actual scientific studies that have been done numerous times across many different districts across the country.
Right. So that's kind of where I wonder, like, how much do we have to wait to have our own data when the data is kind of already presented there? Do we really have to validate it here for our community, or wait for other schools to do it to validate it when, you know, it's pretty standard, which is the reason why a lot of schools are actually making that change.
Yeah.
But there are so many variables to so many variables.
I think, you know, in terms of like getting data from towns, I wouldn't, and John, I appreciate willingness to ask the towns that have done it and have a conversation with the principal. I think less so, you know, can you sort of give us the scientific data of how this change has improved your school, but more like, what happened after you did? What are you seeing? What challenges? Just to like learn from those that have done it. But I agree with you. The data is in the research studies that we've seen. And so we're not looking for contradicting data, but to learn from those that have made the change already.
Yeah, if we can make it a smooth transition by learning from what the other schools have struggled with in being the pioneers of it, then that would definitely make for a better transition for the staff and the students and the parents that clearly are divided as to where they want to fall in that change.
Yeah. And you never know, you might hear a school that says we're still seeing children come in, or we're still seeing students, school children come in tired and exhausted. And maybe a 725 to a 755 isn't going to solve that. And that's reality. And so it wouldn't be surprising to hear that, because really what the research is saying is like 830, and we're not seeing a ton of schools do that. So it wouldn't be surprising to hear that, but that doesn't mean that it didn't have an impact. So,
for me, just the athletic competitors slide it had a lot of data on it, so I liked it. So quick math. I mean, it looks like about 2/3 of these towns are running a 2-tier bus system, from what I can tell. And only about 1/3 are running a 3-tier, which we're running. So, I mean, I guess my question for you, Dr. Clenchey, is we've been running a 3-tier bus system for as long as you've been at the helm, right?
Way longer.
Yeah. So, you know, like the shortcut on this thing for me is the least disruptive thing to the community members, being parents, faculty, and students, is to try to move to a 2-tier system. But at what cost is that? And we've got some rough numbers, and it just you know, 2/3 of the town are already doing this. This is an example where I think, as like the school committee in years past has been fiscally conservative with the town's budget and running a 3-tier system. We're saving money by doing this. So for me, it's going to it's becoming more clear that it's just going to come down to money, and where does the town want to spend the money? Because the least impactful way to do this, probably the most successful way, is to invest in our infrastructure. And 2/3 of the town are doing it.
Mm-hmm.
There's one third that are not. And if you actually look at our neighboring towns, the majority of them are still on a 3-tier. But that was just kind of my observation.
Yeah.
Is that,
no, really good point. I didn't do that math. Also hard to know of the 1/3, how many are considering 2 tiers. And something to keep in mind, even if we made no change, we're still likely talking about additional buses given the town's growth.
yeah.
So it's how many buses to get to 2-tier.
And the other observation I've made quickly is that it appears that our bus routes, again, another example of sort of being financially conservative here, is that our bus routes appear to be longer. So there's a longer start time, lag between the schools. So some of these towns are turning this around in 35 minutes, where we're like 40, 45. And that's because there's a couple extra stops at the heat maps and the way that the town's laid out, 495 and Route 2 and all that good stuff. But unique challenges to us. But, you know, even maybe just adding a bus or 2 buses, we could shift 20 minutes or 15. I don't know, baby steps. Who knows?
Yeah, we actually asked that question to GPI, and he did some analysis, and there was a, what did he call it? A point of no return.
Right.
At which point, even if you added 5 buses, it wouldn't matter because the time to get to high school, if you kept a 3-tier system and added buses, to get from the high school across town to this zone will still take X amount of time. It doesn't matter if you've got 10 other buses floating around, and you have to account for the longest time when you're doing times. So we did ask, and he put it very nicely. There's a point of no return where you could have 20 buses, you will still have X amount of minutes. I don't know, 35, 40, something 35. Because of the town's traffic to get from point A to point B.
I mean, that was one of our strategies, and it wouldn't work. But the point you made, Justin, is really valid. There are a lot of districts out there with 2-tier systems.
It appears the majority, at least our athletic competitors.
Yeah.
And I don't know how long they've had those systems in place. So it's telling to me that, and again, it's a strategy. It comes down to budgeting. There's only so much money to go around. Our middle school and high school kids, if you look, definitely start on the earlier side, and we're saving some money. We're reinvesting that other places within the town.
But budgets reflect priorities, and if this becomes a priority for this committee and this community, our budget should reflect that.
Good point.
So let's talk about next steps, because I'm really going to try to end on time. Here is what came out of some of the comments, as well as a further discussion with our bus company, which unfortunately happened sort of after the consultants had done their report because of medical leave and timings. But originally we had thought this option that I'm going to call option 6 on this slide was not viable because of the number of students that ride the bus in Shaker Lane and Russell Street, and it would just require too many buses to be feasible. But what we actually found out is Russell Street and Shaker Lane in this option would ride different buses because they're not next to each other, and the buses would sort of be going across town. And so it actually makes sense for them to be on different number of buses. And so this option 6 actually requires the exact same number of buses as option 4 if we change the logistics a little. This was one that was mentioned quite a bit in the comments in terms of a suggestion. And then when we pursued it further, it is now a feasible option. So option 6 with the high school, middle school starting together, Shaker Lane, Russell Street starting together, it would be 2-tier. It does have the cost, but it solves issues in terms of families that said, you know, older students need to get out before the younger students because of childcare, the high school, middle school not wanting to start at 9 o'clock because of athletics and activities and getting out too late. It does not address Shaker Lane students still starting later. Russell Street staff probably being opposed to this is my assumption because of it being later. And so, you know, it's not a perfect option. I'm not putting it out there as a perfect option, but it is a 2-tier option that should be considered. And so in our next slide.
Can I ask a quick question about that? So I also, at a cursory glance, don't believe that this is a viable option based upon the GPI study and based upon just my own anecdotal observation of how full the buses are in the morning, because Shaker Lane and Russell Street run different routes right now. And to my observation, those buses are full or nearly full. So we would essentially need to, if we were running 9 buses, we'd almost have to be running 18 buses. Like,
no, this is 13 buses.
I know, but I
And
know
we
that we're
did
growing the
hear
buses
from-
from 9 to 13. So this must be Dee's opinion that
Yeah, based on
actual ridership and not
No.
available ridership.
based on registration, which is far higher than actual ridership, it would require
Steve, do you
13
think
buses.
this is viable? I don't, I mean, I like it. I like it as possibly the best choice, but this doesn't seem to make sense to me.
GPI, when we presented this to them, didn't,
Because if the buses are mostly full now, I don't know how we would run 2 routes of mostly full buses at the same time with only a 50% or 40% increase in the buses.
So
Well, I think we are contracted for 9, but I think we're only running 8.
yes,
Okay.
but I
We
can
have
give
bus
you
routes at all.
50,
exact-
60% increase.
50%, 50, yeah.
so in exact numbers, Shaker Lane has 324 students registered for the bus, and Russell Street has 335, and so that's a total of something. Someone do it for me.
659.
Yeah.
and those routes wouldn't be combined for Shaker Lane.
Right. But what she essentially did is divide that by our target ridership, which was
50 or 55.
55.
It was 55.
Yeah, I think it's 55.
Per bus.
Yeah. So if you take what was the higher number I said? 349 divided by 55.
55 is about
335. What? 335 divided by 55. How many?
Public now.
So
6.5.
6. Yeah.
7. So call it 7 by 7.
Yeah. So she said about 13 buses.
Yeah,
And
so right
keep
now,
in
if
mind,
you're
the
running,
high school, middle school buses aren't full, and you see a lot of parent comments of they're just dropping their kids off because they're registered, but it's too early to take the bus.
Yeah, you have to be careful with just taking raw numbers and dividing them by the number of buses, because you have to consider the routes and traffic and
yeah,
in the population clusters.
right.
I guess my
Right.
point is, if you just take the number of buses, like what you just said not to do, there's about 41 kids on the bus. And then if we were to take the cumulative 659 and divide that by 13 buses, now we've got 50 kids in every bus.
Mm-hmm.
And if the opinion is that kids are already on the bus for 45 minutes on windy roads and all this good stuff, I mean, to put an extra 9, 10 kids on the bus, the route gets 15 minutes longer.
I mean, it depends on the route too, right? You're saying the buses are really full. Our bus is not. I think it depends on which.
Again, it depends on there's clusters.
Yeah, exactly.
Depends on the neighborhood, depends on where,
Yeah.
depends on the time of the year. Some.
Yeah. I mean, I know we've got.
Well, I hope you guys can hear me. Sorry, I had to switch to my phone, but we also have to kind of trust in GPI and D. Like D-Bus, Sandra gave us this feedback. She very adamantly said, yeah, you guys could do this with 13 buses. So we can try to sit here and do the math, but we kind of have to outsource it to the experts, right? And they're saying this is doable.
I think the only thing that I think when you had first brought this up, you said the limitation originally was that there were too many students, or there was too many students for this to be viable. Was that correct?
Yeah, with the Shaker Lane, Russell Street being the biggest number of students cluster wide.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at the heat mapping and stuff, but when Shaker Lane, Russell Street students are split.
Yeah.
Then
Then
they're
it's
each doing their own school. Then
Okay.
that's what her feedback was.
Okay. And does this take into consideration any growth in the town as well? I mean, obviously we're not going to see huge growth within the next year or two, but there will be a time, as we're preparing for the Shaker Lane building to be prepared for an influx.
Well, I'll say this, if you take our current number of students registered, we shouldn't be able to do what we do in E+.
Okay.
Right.
That's what GPI said. Essentially.
Yeah,
That was
yeah.
one of their points.
Yeah, but we're not we can't base anything based on actual ridership. You have to base it on registration. Our registration is almost the entire town. Correct. Right. Almost every student is registered.
Yeah, but you're right. It doesn't take into account potential growth because we're dealing with the scenario as it is now.
As it is right now. Yeah. Which, I mean, we can't estimate what that growth is going to be, but I'm just, if this is already teetering on, we don't necessarily know if we're going to have enough buses, but if we did it today, we would be great. But if we did it next year or in 2 years, would we have to reevaluate this whole thing? That's the only thing.
Which was kind of my point, but I didn't say it earlier. We operate on a 3-tier because we only have whatever 11,000 people in town, or and maybe at some point we're going to get to a 2-tier system, but maybe we need another 1,000. I mean, I'm not asking for more people, but if we're a highly desirable school system with a lot to like about Littleton, I mean, we're going to get there. So as the town gets bigger, maybe we end up needing to be on a 2-tier system just because logistically we can't drive around and pick all these kids up, and the school start times would just get dragged out so much. So if the time isn't now, it could be in the near future. And that's why I'm glad that we went through the process of this. I'm not killing anything or casting a vote or anything, but I'm just suggesting that what we've done over the past has worked up until now, and we're kind of teetering on, does it still work?
Well, it works in terms of moving kids around, whether it works in terms of optimizing their education and their kind of emotional well-being. That's the question for us. And so that's one question. But since we're talking about buses right now, and we were talking about cost benefit analysis earlier, what I'm hearing is that 8's not enough. We probably should be running 9 or so anyway. So what's the difference between
9?
I mean, so it's a real number. What's the difference between 9 buses and 13 buses?
280.
Yep. Projected next year around 280,000.
On top of it's a potential contract negotiation with the bus, which will likely be expected to change anyways.
Yeah. Potential increase.
No, it does not. Okay. We also need to take into account our families too, in terms of, you look at Schicker Lane and Russell Street time differences. I mean, our families for many years have been able to shoulder that responsibility, but it is quite an inconvenience. Yeah. They managed to make it work. It's quite a time differentiation between those two schools. Yeah. And again, it depends, the age difference of children in your family as well. I mean, some people have children in all 3 of those schools, some in all 4 of those schools, but there are younger families that may have, their children in Sugar Lane and Russell Street. There's no perfect scenario, as I think we all agree.
And that's a question I think for this community to consider too. When we say it works, I mean, if we voted on a 4-tier bus schedule, it will work because everyone's going to make it work. Like there's no choice. But that's what I mean. When you're saying it works, what's the alternative to protest?
No buses. Everyone has to drive to get it. Yeah.
There is no alternative. It works because it has to, because that's what it is. But the question really to ask is it successful?
So to answer your question, your comment about the number of kids, about 75% of the students are registered to ride the bus.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was actually one point one data point that I saw that was interesting right after that was that 30% of students don't even ride the bus right now. And that could be for a number of different reasons. But if a lot of it is, as you say, scheduling, that parents are just saying we can't catch the bus that early. Mm-hmm. We don't know how that ridership is going to change when we change those schedules, because for some it might be more convenient. We may get more kids on the bus.
Yeah,
we don't know what that 30%, why they're actually bringing the kids to school and not on the bus. But that seems like that's a big number.
And one of the questions was, if the bus fees were raised, would they likely drop off?
Mm-hmm.
So that might be a factor to consider as well. I don't know if you can really include that or numerize that, but
it's a big variable. It's hard to predict.
And I think it was, if I recall correctly, like 7% said they would stop. But my understanding is we haven't changed bus fees in a long time. Like, how long has it been since we changed bus fees?
At least 16 years.
Okay, so there may be an argument that we should change bus fees to reflect inflation over the last 16 years. And some, maybe not jack them up, but move them anyway. Again, if we're what we're doing is we're challenging inertia with all these questions. We've been doing it this way. Is this the right way to do it? Is this the right number of buses or bus fee, start times? We're rethinking things that these things haven't been taken on for a long time. No one wants to raise bus fees. We don't want to do it. But if percentage of costs of the bus fees covered, my guess has gone down pretty considerably over the last 16 years.
Correct, it has. So the bus fees used to cover about 25% of the cost, and now it's significantly less than that. And the other thing to consider is of those 75% or 70% of the students that ride the bus, only a portion of those pay the fee. Some of them don't pay the fee because of the mileage rules by the Department of Education. So,
and Stacey, to your point about people then riding the bus because it not being earlier, likely we would see that in high school and middle school where there is actually room on the bus, if that makes sense. If we shift the high school, middle school later, and that results in more people riding the bus, they have the least ridership currently.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so there would be room for that shift for them anyways. Yeah. Okay.
Is Jason on the call?
I believe so.
Yes.
So as I was thinking this through, I just had a question for Jason because there's, it's actually the middle school where you have your first dose of that, or those early hours, right? But you're still only in 6th grade. So you might have parents that are like, you still have a bedtime. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then by the time you get to be like 9 through 12, it becomes a little harder to manage your child in terms of bedtime. But those students had practice 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade. So, this started as we got to start the high school kids later because they need more sleep. But in actuality, the way that our system played out is these kids have been doing this for 3 years prior to getting to high school. So I guess I was just, since I haven't lived middle school yet, I was just wondering, like, Jason's opinion, like, is it a terrible situation at the middle school, or do the kids come to school for the most part? Is he here?
He dropped now.
He heard me call his name and then dropped off.
He heard you frame a question. Is it terrible? He's feeling,
Okay.
Oh, that's right.
Perhaps, there's another opportunity for him to answer that question, or maybe Kelly has.
John wants to.
Yeah, anybody. I don't know.
Well, I mean, we track achievement, we track attendance, and it works out. We would have been asking for a change years ago. So they do adjust. And again, it depends on how you're wired to a certain degree. Some people are morning people, some people aren't. I mean, not everybody will benefit from a change.
Right.
But right now, there are some people that would benefit from a change. So we're not going to ever attain 100% satisfaction. But our middle school is fine at this point in time. They do make the adjustment and they flourish.
Sure. And we did receive comments, my middle, like, in that, some of them are like, had been heart-wrenching. Like, my middle school students really, like, I want to acknowledge that, yes, it's not perfect for everybody, but I just wanted to raise the point that the middle school and the high school are starting at the same time. And when you have a 6th, 7th, or 8th grader, there's a little bit more parental input on that child's. You're laughing. Is there not?
You're very optimistic about what's coming in front of you. Yeah. I want you to remember, a minister reflect that. Just to think under control of middle school.
I have a hard enough time now, but
Good luck.
As the student progresses, they're kind of making their own decisions at that point in time as to, when I get home from school, or when the school day ends, I have these wonderful 45 minutes that I get to enjoy before my after school activities start. And I choose not to do my homework. Okay. So then I have to do my homework after, dinner, shower, homework. I'm up till 1 o'clock in the morning or midnight. Well, that's a decision that they made. When they were in 6th, 7th, or 8th grade, maybe they didn't have the luxury of making some of those same decisions, and they went to bed earlier and they're getting up at the same time.
Yeah. There were definitely a lot of comments, and we heard them at the forum too, about not sacrificing the younger students for the sake of the older students. So we can't be talking about pushing older students and then suddenly making the Shaker Lane students start at 725. It was not one of the options we listed, but it was one of the options explored. But, you know, there's a myth that younger children wake up at the crack of dawn. Again, not all of them do. There are some that are morning risers and some that are not. So that was a really important point from the community is we're talking about high school, middle school, sure, but it doesn't mean sacrificing the younger kids.
And I do believe that fatigue that we hear in terms of our younger students is more a result of the duration of the length of the day than it is the time of the day. Mm-hmm. Just so that they're in a structured environment for 6.5 hours. Mm-hmm. So.
But you're right.
Complicated issue.
Yes, very much. So on the last slide, we met with the start time subcommittee on Monday, reviewed all of the data, had another very lively discussion. And this is our recommendation to this committee for next steps. We propose focusing on the top 3 options. As I mentioned, we previously offered 5 options, which presents data in a very particular way. And so the top 3 options would be 1 3-tier option, 1 2-tier option, and the current option. And the 3-tier option being shift 35 or shift 25, which was of the 3-tier options, this was the one that was preferred the most. The 2-tier option.
I'm sorry. Is it 35 or is it 25?
It's 25.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll change it.
Okay.
You know, I will say it was shift 35 on the GPI. But then Russell Street was like 920. Okay. And that just felt not okay. So we made it shift 25, but then I didn't change the name. So it's shift 25. A 2-tier option and the current schedule. We're proposing to replace option 4 with option 6 as the better 2-tier option for the reasons I sort of shared, but you know, one being, you know, staff sort of shared between the campuses and PD days. Those are how they're designed, K-5 and 6-12. Families sort of making childcare solutions. You know, having kids in K-5 is very different than having a 5th grader and an 8th grader, where sometimes those become different solutions anyway, or the child is staying home. And you know, we actually found out also later about the middle school sports. We had been focusing so much on high school athletics and high school sports, and you know, we looked at the towns at high school, but middle school athletics is also a big piece to consider. And so starting the middle school at 9 is very challenging, or later. And so just keeping high school and middle school together actually works for those after school activities and athletics too. And so for that reason, we propose replacing option 4 with option 6 as a 2-tier option, because they're the same amount of buses, according to Sandra. And then conducting a follow-up survey with these 3 options only, but not like the previous survey, addressing a lot of what you all had talked about with what do we do with this 1 to 5 and first, second, third choice? What is this really telling us? A different type of survey, similar to the one that Acton Boxborough actually did, where each option is compared with each other. So if it was option 5, if it was current schedule or 2-tier, which would you pick? If it was current schedule or shift 25, which would you pick? If it was shift 25 or current schedule, which would you pick? Because that would actually give exactly what you were talking about, which what does this really tell us? And I think that will be very concrete of, okay, if we're keeping the current schedule or doing a 2-tier, a lot of people want 2-tier, but if it's current schedule or 25, they'd rather keep current schedule. I'm making that up, but we could then do that sort of analysis.
It's not a tournament of all the options.
Yeah, and we have to do it with only 3, otherwise it's too many questions. And then a feedback we had gotten from one of our student representatives in the subcommittee, and I mentioned this earlier, is, you know, as a high school student, she said they were super focused on just what the high school start times were without looking at the bigger picture, because they're not a parent of a Shaker Lane student and not thinking about the childcare or a staff at Russell Street. And so this student suggested listing the challenges and benefits of each of these 3 options, so that even if they don't apply to you, you could sort of see the bigger picture from the perspective of the community and then make a choice instead of what's best for you. Which I thought was a great idea. So this is our recommendation to the school committee from the subcommittee, is to conduct a follow-up survey. We would do it fast. It's ready to go, so it could go out tomorrow. And we would give the community until, the timeline, actually the next slide. We would give the community, we know next week is Thanksgiving. And so we would give the community until the Tuesday after and very quickly do result analysis on Wednesday and have it ready to present on Thursday, still in time for a potential vote.
That makes a lot of sense to me. The one question or comment I might add to that is we were talking earlier about how a lot of decisions or the steering committee or subcommittee was guided by reading you had done. This committee has done a lot of the same reading. You've shared materials with us. Is it useful to include for additional reading, just links or anything like that so for committee members who are willing, who want to read more than just 3 bullet points that we provide to them, so they can right? Because I think it's useful. What we found over the last couple of years, it's useful for reading the same information and responding to it.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's something your committee is ready to do. If there are a couple of articles that were, hey, this was really helpful, or this seems to be a really nice peer-reviewed summary of the science.
Yeah.
It may be useful to put that in frut of the community.
Yeah.
They can read it, not read it.
Yeah.
But if it's guiding our thinking,
yeah,
then it may help us have a good conversation forward.
Yeah, the reason I think it's a really great idea, and we should include it as context for the impetus of all of this work. The reason I hesitated putting it in the first one is I didn't want people to read it and think, well, no matter what I vote, they're going to change it, because clearly there's all these articles that say we have to. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But I think, we did that initial survey, we got a lot of feedback, we've narrowed it down, and I think for the second survey, I think it makes sense to include context of what the research says and sort of why we're doing all this, because they have had an opportunity to share their voice without feeling like there was data to push in a direction. If that makes sense.
I think Jen pointed out earlier, we have 10 really well prepared slides showing all this data from our community. That's part of the conversation. It's not all the conversation.
Yep.
So we've been doing our reading. We've been talking to colleagues. We'll hear from other principals. There's other kind of sources of information. And again, I think this has been an incredibly transparent policy. I really appreciate the work you and the committee have done. I think the more we can err on that side, hey, here's what we're reading. I think that would be helpful. And not an exhaustive list, but here's 2 or 3 things. If you want to do some more reading, here's some.
Why. Yeah, happy to include.
I'm not trying to create more work for y'all. You've done enough.
It's already there.
Okay.
We could just include it. I think that's great.
Yeah, totally agree. Thanks, Brad. We absolutely will include that context in the next email to the community with the survey. Totally agree.
So to clarify, we have the thought process here. The recommendations are we have a solution, which is a change, but at no cost. So it's like a shift 25.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have another solution, which is probably the most tolerable based upon the survey results, because it kind of keeps the most amount of people happy, but it's likely at the tune of an additional $280,000.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third option, of course, is just no change.
Mm-hmm.
So that seems to make sense. And based upon sort of the survey results that we got, which is kind of a hodgepodge of everything so far, do you believe that it will be impactful or helpful for us to run another survey? Like, do you think that we're actually going to get data that helps us make a decision, or are we just going through the motions because we've whittled it down? Because if we're just going through the motions because we've whittled it down, I kind of think that we don't necessarily need another survey. Mm-hmm. But if it doesn't cost us anything and we're willing to do it, if the administration is willing to do it, share the data and run the numbers, then we're willing. I know that the committee is willing to read it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we actually heard feedback from the subcommittee.
Okay.
Multiple things. The student that I had shared was like, well, I was really just looking at it from one lens, and it was sort of framed this way, or the questions were different. I wouldn't have picked first, second, third, just looking at the high school times. So we're eliminating the way the survey was done based on that feedback. But we also heard from the staff representatives about that, that sort of 1 to 5 skew that you saw, and that big 3 of like, well, I think I want change, but not if it's this. And so addressing that in this survey of what the question you had asked of, do people really want change? It's hard to gather from the previous survey, but with this survey, you want change if it's this, but not if it's this, will be really concrete. I think that's pretty valuable data, unless this committee feels like it won't change anything and you already know based on the research.
I think if we get even we get the same kind of ambiguous response where it's a plurality but no majority, that's still data that's useful. I mean, having it 1/3 stay the same, 2/3 one of these changes is useful to us. I mean,
yeah, and I think also we don't want to necessarily be in a position as a school committee where we vote on an option that we've never put in front of the community. We have to remember this option 6 that we're calling it, we have not put that out to the community yet. So I think that's not a great idea. I think putting it out as a second survey as an option, at the very least, gets it in front of people. We gauge their response and we have that as another data point. We also allow the community to look at it and think about it and give us feedback on it before we vote on it or not on it.
When we list option 6, do we have the survey prepared to just address the monetary issue that would create for the town? So do we say at a cost of $280,000, which as a committee, we might decide that 1/3 of that increase would be covered by, I'm just throwing numbers out there, like 1/3 of the increase might be covered by additional bus fees, and then therefore 2/3 of it would need to be the burden of just the everyday taxpayer in Littleton who might not even have children in the school.
But again, that's what we're putting in context. 280,000, maybe 200, again, throwing numbers, 200,000 comes at the expense of taxpayers. That's less than 1% of our overall budget. Right? Our overall budget is 23, so it's 0.75%.
I think it would be more like 230, because when you look at the actual increase in bus fees, we're looking at a number of about 50,000.
Well, so 230 is actually right. So then it's 1% of our overall budget. If that helps us, that helps me think through this. If it's 1% of our overall budget, but if we decide that it gets us to a schedule that works for our families and will benefit our students in measurable ways, or really important if in tangible ways, then 1% seems okay. Like, so saying 280, I'm just saying 280,000 sounds like a big number in the abstract. But
I mean, I think without all that context, it's sticker shock. So if the purpose of putting it there is to shock people with the number, it will achieve that. But if you have to take the number in context, and so I don't think it's fair to put a number without all of that context.
Well, then do that. It's very easy to ask for something when you don't know at what expense it costs.
Yeah.
So, let's do 2-tier. That's obvious.
Yeah.
But okay, well that's going to
increase their school budget by 1%, at the cost.
Everyone's tax bill is going to go up. I mean, there's no way around it. I don't, this.
Well, then
I think that, so like from the graph of the different concerns that were tiered, it was about 8% that were concerned with budget or cost. That was where it fell on their rank. So I think it obviously it affects some families, but I don't know if it's necessarily going to be what's going to make them decide for one option or another. For the majority of families, it seemed like it was fairly low on the priority list. That increase of 150, was it 150?
It will if the way we had phrased the question was about increasing bus fees 50%, which was a high number. Like I don't know that that's actually what's on the table, but even with that, 40% said they would continue to ride the bus, right? But the question becomes at 280,000, are we offsetting that cost? Yes, in some way, right? Either through tax dollars or through bus fees. But how do the question that will come up is, how much of this am I paying for? Like if I'm going to pay for this much, sure, I'll vote for that option. If you're going to increase bus fees to $550, I might not vote for that option. Without that context, how do you answer that?
You pay for it now or you pay for it later. So you're either going to pay for it while your kids are in school, or you're going to pay for it for as long as you live in Littleton. Because if we don't charge a higher user fee, then the burden is shared by all taxpayers. And as long as you live in this town, you're going to be paying for it. So do you want do you want to pay more while your family's benefiting from the start time? Or do you want to pay for this when you're 70 years old and your kids have been out of school forever? I mean, either way, we're all going to pay for this. I mean, there is no.
Keep in mind the people that are paying more are offsetting the cost for everyone that's not paying too.
Correct. Those that aren't paying are the ones that we really can't charge. I mean, everyone that can pay, we've asked to pay. And we've picked a number. It doesn't cover their bus fee. It's less than $1 a ride, as I said the other meeting.
this will be of all the financial impacts that will be on families. I feel like the bus is going to be the least of the impact. I mean, a lot of people are concerned with having after and before school care. Like that's a big financial burden for people as well. So if we're including, you know, that impact financially, do we have to weave in how many of you are going to need care? Because that's a big part of the question too. It's not just the extra $150 a year for the bus. It's the thousands of dollars potentially that could be added because of a shift in their schedule.
Because an extra 25 minutes of childcare. But other families will not have to pay for that.
Right. You're right in that this will cost more money and that's an important factor to consider moving to 2-tier. But how do you reflect the actual cost versus other costs that are offsetted, unless in all the other options you're saying, well, in this one you might have less childcare, so you'll actually save X amount. You know what I mean? Like, how do you do
a lot of layers?
Because all that 280 is going to do is sticker shock for that one option, but it's not in context of the full picture. If that makes sense.
But we do at some point in time we do need to make our public aware of it. There is a cost. I mean, it's a catch-22. If you appear to be not transparent.
No, that's what I think it's important.
We're going to lose some credibility, but it's a matter of timing. One thing I wanted to mention, and one thing we need to be concerned about is Prop 2.5. And the town can only increase its budget by 2.5%. And if you want to go beyond that, it's called an override. And overrides typically in the state of Massachusetts don't have a high success rate of passing. So we really need to sit down with the select board and FinCom and find out what impact does this have on the town budget as a whole, because we really need to make sure we're under 2.5 or under.
Right. I don't want to minimize the impact of $200,000 in town budget, but if we added an extra full-time nurse and an administrative assistant, salary plus benefits, which we say, hey, we need this, we should have more of these people. That's $200,000 on our budget. Right. And so we last time, I think we voted $40,000-$50,000 to add lights in one end zone because we need better vision for.
That's not like 200 grand and we haven't been able to do that.
Okay. Well, I mean, but we were saying, but this, we approved it without taking it to the voters. It's one of those things where if we think this is important, then let's be completely transparent about the cost. But I don't know, in the town budget, I don't know if we need a special meeting with the board of selectmen to ask for an extra $200,000.
Well, we're not asking for $280,000. We need to make sure that whatever we do as a town, we stay within that 2.5% increase. Because if you don't, it brings on significant challenges. So I mean, that's just a reality of Prop 2.5.
Understood. So the finance committee has already reached out and they've invited myself, Kelly, and Steve to their Tuesday meeting, because the last slide in tonight's presentation, which we'll go over for budget subcommittee, you know, we do have a 7.4% projected increase from this year's appropriated budget to next year's, because and part of that is the 280. So I don't want to get off track here because we still have a process to go through, which is sending out another survey, discussing it through, taking a vote. But I think between now and the vote, or shortly after the vote, we're going to get some real feedback from the finance committee and the select board to say, this is either feasible or it's not feasible. And if we vote it through as a thing that the school committee would like, and we hear from the finance committee that we don't have the money to pay for it, and if we look in through our budget and we can't find a way to pay for it either, then we kind of have to shelf it as something that we strongly support, but we're just waiting for an opportunity to put it in play. Or we hear back from the select board and the FinCom, and yeah, great. The community's been asking for this for a while. That you guys finally put it through. We've been able to work the numbers, and we can start next year. So that process, I think, is just going to naturally play out over the next couple of weeks.
And that's why the survey actually gives the data on how the community feels about it, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Can I just bring up one thing that we haven't, because we had the community forum that was 2 weeks ago, and I think last week, 2 weeks. most of the parents that spoke were the working parents, which I feel like we haven't really talked about at all, the impact on the working parents and what this shift will have on them. And obviously, you know, we'll have people be able to raise their hands and ask any questions, but is there any way or anything that we need to do to ensure that there are some systems or some programs in place for the families that are going to be impacted substantially by not having childcare or being really impacted by it? I mean, I just know Tigerstone is already it's at its max. We have staffing issues already. And for us to make this big shift, there's enough parents that seem to have a concern with before and after school care. I think it was like almost 17% that were concerned with that. Where does that fall into our decision making of creating a little bit of a buffer there?
There are no easy solutions to this, and part of it is the time of day that we're hiring staff for. I mean, if you have children of your own and you were asked to work in that program, it wouldn't work for most people. So that's part of the challenge. I know there's a shortage out there, but despite the shortage, it's the time that we're asking people to work. We did partner with Park and Rec for grades 4 and 5. Took some pressure off us as help. But we're still struggling. I think last time I checked, we had 20, 25 people on our waiting list.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
That's a lot. That's hard. That's really hard for parents to find that care if they can't get it with the school. It's really hard within the community to find that, and that can be debilitating for some families to not have that care.
Yeah.
And I think there's enough working families in the community that we definitely have to at least keep that in mind or keep that on the table, that no matter what we change, obviously we want to do what's best for the students, but we need to make sure that the students that are going to be impacted in other ways are taken care of as well. I don't want anyone left behind, I guess, is what I'm saying. I don't think anyone does.
Stacey, even if we make no change, it's a challenge.
Right.
Like, that's the issue.
It's always a challenge, yes.
It's possible that a change will be a greater challenge or will alleviate some challenge.
Yeah.
It's like based on the family circumstances, right? It's hard to tell. But it's already such a large challenge. So even if we voted not to change anything, I feel like that's a whole additional challenge to address. You're right.
Right. And I've got to jump. Sorry, guys, but I was going to chime in and just say, yeah, the fact that the kids are in school for 6 to 7 hours a day and parents need to work 8 to 10 hours a day, including commute times, that's just a challenge in our country. And whether we shift start times or not, as Beanal just said, it's a very, very tough challenge that almost is not irrelevant to this, but it's like, it's going to happen. It's going to be a challenge whether we change things or not. So it's not a good answer, but it's a fact.
Yeah, and I totally agree. We can't solve that problem here, but we don't have any reports of kids not coming to school because they can't get to school, right? We don't have any of that. We would never want to see anything like that where there's such a burden on families that they have to switch schools or, figure something different out.
We did hear from some community members. Actually, I was kind of surprised. They were like, yeah, I send my kid someplace else because start time for a challenge.
Right.
I don't know if I heard that incorrectly, but that's the feedback that I got from some people that attended the forum, or some people that filled out the survey was, my kid doesn't go to Littleton Public Schools because their start time is terrible.
Yeah.
I was kind of surprised. But why don't we do this? I think we've kind of talked about many aspects of this, and there's a lot more to think about. But if we're good, why don't we open the floor up in the event that there are some interested citizens that wish to speak on the topic, and then we can close out with the rest of our agenda. Because do you want support on the sending out the survey? I think there's consensus that sending out the survey is fine.
I don't think we need a motion.
Yeah, no.
Yeah,
so, and again, want to thank Beanal and Jen for all the work, and the rest of the school start time subcommittee members, because you put a lot of work into this. So thanks again.
Just help us spread the word, because it's a short amount of time and holidays are there.
Short window.
So we'll definitely be reaching out to the principals, students, staff. Please do. We get a lot of parent responses, and we want to make sure we hear from staff and students too.
Okay, great.
I have it added to the school, like the principal's email. I don't know if the other surveys were included or talked about at all in these emails.
I'm not sure. We did send the survey out to family.
Yeah, every family got it separately, but if there's a reminder within the week, that might just be a helpful thing because parents are reading, trying to read up that to keep up with.
We'll tweet it out.
Current
as well.
very good.
There's not sure how many we're gonna read, but
Sure. I just say one more thing about the process, because what I really like, what I learned tonight about the process is how option 6 was included, because we heard from community, hey, can you rethink this, can you go back to, but also we excluded certain options. Hey, we're here and we can't do that. So that this works if it's really iterative and we're getting feedback and we're responding to, we're asking for more input. Ultimately, we make a vote. But I really like that the way the committee is listening to the community and incorporating the ideas into our options, and that it's in such specific ways. I think that's great.
Well said. All right. We'll take a pause here for a second opportunity for interested citizens. So either those that are with us in the room or those that might be zooming in, you can raise your hand if you wish to speak.
You don't have to raise hands.
Give it one more second. We don't have anybody out in Zoom land that wants to talk, so.
Stuck with us this long.
Yeah. All right. Fair enough. That might be because we had a public forum, and I want to again reiterate that was a nice idea and give everybody an opportunity between the survey and the public forum. I think we've heard from everybody that wishes to speak. So, all right, we will close up tonight's meeting with some subcommittee reports. So,
Did we want to talk about the appropriated budget this time?
oh my bad. Yeah.
Yeah, under the budget subcommittee.
But okay. Yeah, sorry.
Catching me off guard here. I'm like, where does that fit in? All right, so subcommittee reports will run through them in order. PMDC. No report from the NBC. Okay. Budget subcommittee. So we do have something to report, which is the last slide of tonight's presentation.
Brought that up?
Yeah, sure. And Steve, I'll run through it. And if I misspeak or you want me to add more, Kelly, please feel free to do so. So, budget subcommittee had a meeting last week, which is an early look at where we are projecting next year's budget. So in the upper left-hand corner, we've got the appropriated budget for 2023, which is $23,050,000. And then we've got additional projected increased costs. So the first line item there is just salary increase based upon current staffing levels, which is a cost of living adjustment, and then the staff moving across either the steps or lanes based upon longevity within the district or advancement within professional degrees. That's at the tune of $803,000. Kelly has gone ahead with the help of the rest of the administrative staff, leadership team, and identified 3 additional costs that he would like us to try to incur next year, which is an adjustment for team chairs. So there's some individuals on the staff that are doing some work now where we would like to compensate them for that. Additional SPED administrative support to the tune of $50,000, and then hiring an additional staff member, I believe, 1 member at the 6th grade level.
correct.
The tune of $85,000. So for a total of 161 with those adjustments. So in cumulative, almost $1 million, $964,000 of additional staffing increase projected for next year. And then these are additional line items which Steve Mark's gone through and forecasted as to what we're currently budgeting versus where we might come in next year. So as we're all watching our own utility bills come in with inflation, there could be as much as $100,000 increase for across all utilities for the school buildings. That's on top of what we budgeted for current year. Coincidentally, we're at the end of our 5-year bus contract with D-Bus, and every year there's a built-in increase, but when you go to renew, you send it out to bid, you send it out to bid as many players are willing to bid back, and we're forecasting that to run the same buses next year, we might be looking at about $113,000 increase. At the school budget subcommittee meeting, because Jen's on that committee and she's also on the school start time committee, we had a conversation real quickly about the need for potential additional buses in the event that we wanted to pass this, put this through. So that's why the 280 shows up there. There's some other small administrative things like copier leases and security systems and cameras and things like that, 10,000. The 30,000 is a result of making a market adjustment to our substitutes. So upon reflection of what we pay substitutes, we know how hard it's been to get substitute teachers. There was an increase there, which could be the tune of about $30,000. I think communication went out. I believe it was retroactive through this current November, right? November 1st. So that's already in place. And we're just forecasting that's going to cost an extra $30,000 next year. The 180 there is our out of district placements. So per state regulation, those out of district placements are allowed to go 14% next year, which they will go, like, it's a surprise they will go up because they are allowed to. So that's at the tune of about an additional 180. And then $25,000 for case collaborative tuition, program tuition. So all in all, when Kelly, Steve, and I had attended the select board meeting, joint meeting with the FinCom, I want to say it was about a month ago. They had used roughly a 5% figure, which was about a tune of a $1.2 million increase. And when we take a look at what our actual needs might be within the district, we're forecasting that we could be as high as 1.7 or a 7.4% increase. So that's where we're at. That's, you know, it's sort of rough math at this point in time. But that may have been the reason why I was, you know, stressing 280 in costs and you know, we have,
because you take the 280 out, it gets us to 5%.
Yeah, you know, closer.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate that we're going to be renegotiating the bus contract at the same time, like, so the actual busing fee increase isn't 280, it's actually, you know, closer to 400,000. So,
well, and it's unfortunate that the state increased the rate to 14% too, because that's normally been a 3 to 4% annual increase.
Right.
And because of the pandemic and all the costs and the staffing costs that those private schools are having, they were approved for a 14% increase.
Yeah.
That's beyond our control.
So, Brad?
I just, one related question. I'm glad, and I've heard from members of the community that we increased the sub rates. And Kelly, I mentioned to you that I'd heard that our nurse substitute rates or daily rates are lower than our surrounding towns.
That was changed.
We changed those in November, mid-November.
Okay. It is mid-November. Like we changed those.
We changed it like a couple of weeks ago. Or
okay.
Months ago, we increased those rates.
Fantastic.
It was October.
October, whatever it was. Sorry, I'm getting my months
for the nursing rates.
For the nursing rates.
Great. There we go.
Asking you, Shepard.
Jeez,
there you go.
that was easy.
Anyone want anything? All right. So any other questions on that?
No,
that's
okay. Thank you.
You got it. All right, scrolling back through here.
So can I? So
you may. Yes.
So am I clear to release this number as an official budget request to the town?
You need a motion?
I don't think we need a motion.
Just a consensus.
Yeah,
I think so.
Okay.
And then
how do we do that before we voted?
These are preliminary numbers.
Yeah,
so like it's the town's first look at what our potential ask might be for an increase.
Okay.
And it's also a chance, if I understand correctly, to see if there's going to be significant pushback on that 280 is a bridge too far, or it'll give us some context about how the overall town budget.
Correct. So the process will be the town will take that number, plug that into the town overall budget model, and see where that falls with expected revenues and other department increases from the town, and then figure out where we are town-wise as a budget.
And so as we're revisiting this conversation, as I said, we will in 2 weeks or whenever we meet again, we'll have that information from the town. Would that be a data point we can consider when we
I think that might be,
is that too early?
We might have feedback after that, after we meet with the Board of Selectmen and the FinCom. Or the FinCom, right? FinCom?
Tuesday at 7.
Okay, perfect.
Got you.
Thanks.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a process here, and the process started at our budget subcommittee meeting, which Tyler Gray from FinCom attended. And then we wanted to roll the budget forward to tonight to see if anyone had any feedback, and if there isn't any pushback on this,
that's great.
Then yes, at this point we should consider this the school committee's first first glance or, you know, first chance to put the forecast together. Make sense?
Yep.
Great. Thank you. And then just one point of clarification, because I forgot to mention the 803 for the salary increase in the existing staff. If I remember correctly, that's a 2% cost of living adjustment, right?
No, so it's a 3% cost of living adjustment.
Okay.
And it also makes up for this year, the FY23, where we budgeted 2% as approved by the budget, approved at 3%. So we have that to make up this year, and then it rolls into next year. So it's
okay.
It's next year's kind of a 2-year catch up in the budget.
So. Okay, which I think is important for everyone to understand.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. All right. So, Shaker Lane Building Committee. There should be something, just because I saw some communication. Maybe Kelly will cover it. But
we're trying to get an initial budget. I mean, an initial building committee meeting going so that people can meet and you can establish leadership of that committee. That's probably not going to be until January sometime. We're trying to work with the town and the town administrator on those dates.
Okay.
MSBA did reach out to town administrator and myself for a meeting with the MSBA to talk about enrollment projection. So
right, that's what I saw. Because they had accepted our enrollment report and wanted to schedule a subsequent, you know, follow-up meeting to discuss the details or forecast and projections. So I think from the community standpoint, we just want to inform everyone that process, you know, we're continuing to meet those deadlines and turning the paperwork in on time, and you know, the workload is ramping up.
It is, and we just have one more
correct
submission, and then we've done everything we need to go back to them and apply for state or phase 2 of the building process, which would be a bid study.
Correct. So the next step in there, so there's a deadline at the end of December for some maintenance and operations information that we have to submit. And then MSBA will review the data and then quote unquote invite us into the next phase, which is the feasibility study phase. And then there is a MSBA board meeting. I don't remember the exact date, March or April. That we would get invited to as part of that process. So
I think if I remember correctly, we have to have that meeting prior to March 23rd.
Yeah, something like that. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's moving forward.
Yeah. Policy subcommittee, anything to report?
Nothing to report except that we will resume our activities once Beetle has been released from this committee. We've in respect for our newest committee member who has been taking over this enormous task, we have not been meeting regularly. We've got a schedule with Dorothy. We're scheduling up regular meetings to meet so that we hope to get through some policies, and that we will share our agenda the ones we're considering with the committee and with CPAC and with others once we have our meeting schedule and our goals set, which I need to, once I answer Dorothy's email, it'll be January. Yeah, we'll start. We'll have a lot more subcommittees reports from that point on.
Terrific. Yeah. Fair enough. CPAC have an update to report?
CPAC may have something to say. What I have to say for CPAC is that we're going to continue our regular meetings. I think maybe move more to monthly meetings between Lynn Snow, the CPAC leadership, and the school committee. Trying to keep that conversation open. And the one I have on my calendar is a January 10th workshop on the evening of January 10th. Is that correct?
Yeah. So we have a CPAC meeting on January 10th, but we haven't sorted out if there will be a workshop yet.
Okay.
So we
I have my notes. Okay. This is just for me, not for public consumption. I'm sorry. Okay.
We have things in December.
Okay. Would you like to tell us about them, since I don't seem to have that?
December is just the parent meetup on Tuesday 13th, 6 to 8 at the library.
Okay.
Change.
So I say to the microphone, a parent meetup 6 to 8 in the library. It's not a business meeting, a chance for parents involved and work of CPAC and just to get together and talk and visit and share notes and
just parents and just
yeah.
Come in and
chat and snack and chat and just visit. December 13th from 6 to 8 in the library.
And then we have a meeting with Lynn and
yep.
you on December 5th.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Perfect. Very good. Anything else that the school committee wishes to put forward tonight? Good. All right.
Wishing everybody a happy Thanksgiving. Yeah.
Yes.
That's right.
Enjoy your
yep. I will say that our next school committee meeting is December 1st, same time, same location, and a lot of work to be done between now and then. Yep.
Move to adjourn.
Seconded. Motion made by Mr. Ross and seconded by Ms. Patel. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
15 minutes.
There's a demand that remains.